Welcome to Walking the Torah Portions. I'm Tyler Merwin, and this is Torah Portion, METZORA. This week's Torah portion is Leviticus 14:1 through 15:33. The half-Torah this week is 2 Kings 7:3 through 20. METZORA actually is translated infected one. In our opening line it says, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh spoke to Moses, saying, "This shall be the law of the leprous person," or METZORA, infected one, for the day of his cleansing. Leviticus 14:1 and 2. This week, our Torah portion will be part 2 of a doubled portion when read in non-leap years. Our portion this week continues with the person afflicted with biblical leprosy, or sarat. One who has sarat is a METZORA, or infected one. Last week's portion covered the detailed process of examining the person for all the different ways sarat may manifest in their body. This week, we'll cover the process for cleansing the METZORA once the signs and symptoms have been removed. Remember that sarat is a spiritual disease caused primarily by lashon hara, which means evil speech or slander. We spoke about this last week, so let's go back to Numbers 12 to get a little more context. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman who he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. And they said, "Has Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also?" And Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh heard it. Now the man Moses was very meek, more than all people who were on the face of the earth. And suddenly Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh said to Moses and to Aaron and Miriam, "Come out, you three, to the tent of meeting." And the three of them came out, and Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent of meeting and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forward. And he said, "Hear my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak with him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak mouth to mouth, clearly and not in riddles. And he beholds the form of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses?" And the anger of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh was kindled against them, and he departed. When the cloud removed from over the tent, behold, Miriam was leprous like snow. And Aaron turned toward Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. Numbers 12, 1 through 10. Here we have a textbook case of lashon hara with the punishment of sarat. Moses does intercede for his sister, and she is healed, but we'll cover this more in detail when we get to that Torah portion. There's one more other time we see someone afflicted with sarat in the 5 books of Moses. Do you remember where it was? It's back in Exodus 4, where God is tasking a reluctant Moses to return to Egypt to free Israel, his people. God tells Moses that he is sending him to the elders, and he lets Moses know that they will listen to you. Then Moses answered, "But behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh did not appear to you." Exodus 4:1. Moses spoke lashon hara against his brothers, essentially saying they would not have faith, and he just told God that what God said wouldn't happen. God gives Moses a sign of his staff becoming a serpent. God tells Moses to pick up the serpent with his hand, and it becomes a staff again. God then tells Moses, again, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh said to him, "Put your hand inside your cloak." And he put his hand inside his cloak. And when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous like snow. Then God said, "Put your hand back inside your cloak." So he put his hand back inside his cloak. And when he took it out, behold, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. Exodus 4, 6 and 7. So Moses gets a touch of sarat after his minor infraction of lashon hara. I think it's also interesting that Adonai made him pick up the serpent by the tail with his hand. Kind of like God is showing through him that through me, you will be able to control the serpent, which would be represented by Pharaoh. But the same thing that controlled the serpent, which was his hand, which represented Moses, was also turned leprous for Lashon Hara, at least temporarily. Let's get back to this week's portion. He shall be brought to the priest, and the priest shall go out of the camp, and the priest shall look. Then if the case of leprous disease is healed in the leprous person, the priest shall command them to take for him who is to be cleansed 2 live clean birds, and cedar wood, and scarlet yarn, and hyssop. And the priest shall command them to kill one of the birds in an earthenware vessel over fresh water. He shall take the live bird with the cedar wood, and the scarlet yarn, and the hyssop, and dip them and the live bird in the blood of the bird that was killed over fresh water. And he shall sprinkle it 7 times on him who is to be cleansed of the leper's disease. Then he shall pronounce him clean, and shall let the living bird go into an open field. The purification process for someone healed of Tzorah is a 3-step process, and this is step number 1. The sages see the use of birds in this process as related to the sin of Lashon Hara, or gossip. As birds are often chattering amongst each other, and we even have a saying when talking about gossip or speaking gossip that a little birdie told me. They also see the other implements of the service representing the Metzora's change from proud and haughty to someone with the fruit of repentance. The cedar tree is very tall and can represent pride and haughtiness, the state that brought about the Tzorah in the first place. The scarlet dye comes from a lowly insect, and the hyssop was a lowly weed-like plant, both representing humility of repentance. Rabbi Foreman also sees a parallel to the Exodus story in this symbolism. Like he often says, where have we seen this before? He sees the doorpost and lintel image in the cedar wood, along with the hyssop they used to apply the blood. The blood of the Passover lamb is scarlet like the dyed yarn. What about the 2 birds? One is killed and the other is released, like the final plague in Egypt, the death of the firstborn. Those without faith lost their firstborn, but those who applied the blood of the lamb were set free. As the children of Israel were separated under slavery, after the Passover, they were birthed into a people, into a community. A leper is separated by his sin, but when he repents and is healed, the symbols of the Passover are used to birth him back into his people, into his community. And he who is to be cleansed shall wash his clothes and shave off all his hair and bathe himself in water, and he shall be clean. And after that he may come into the camp, but live outside of his tent for 7 days. And on the 7th day he shall shave off all his hair from his head, his beard, and his eyebrows. He shall shave off all of his hair, and then he shall wash his clothes and bathe his body with water, and he shall be clean. Leviticus 14, 8 and 9. This is step 2 of the purification process. The text focuses on shaving the head and the facial hair, since that's closer to the source of the actual sin, our thoughts and our speech. But the whole body would actually be shaved. It's interesting to know that through science that actually hair has a memory. What I mean by that is that hair actually stores a chemical history. We use hair follicle samples today for drug testing, and those samples will actually show evidence of drug use going back for months. By the Metzora shaving all of their hair, they are in fact beginning anew, removing the past evidence and memory of their sin. After shaving, the clothes and body are washed, and they are clean, a new or renewed creation. And on the 8th day he shall take 2 male lambs without blemish, and 1 ewe lamb a year old without blemish, and a grain offering, and 3/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, and 1 log of oil. And the priest who cleanses him shall set the man who is to be cleansed and these things before Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Leviticus 14, 10 and 11. This is the third step of the process, third and final. The text will go on to say that if you cannot afford this offering, that it can only be 1 lamb with the birds, or if you can't even afford that, it can be 2 turtle doves or even 2 pigeons. The priest shall take some of the blood of the guilt offering, and the priest shall put it on the lobe of the right ear of him who is to be cleansed, and on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. Then the priest shall take some of the log of oil, and pour it into the palm of his own left hand, and dip his finger in the oil that is in his left hand, and sprinkle some of the oil with his finger 7 times before Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. And some of the oil that remains in his hand the priest shall put on the lobe of the right ear of him who is to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, on top of the blood of the guilt offering. And the rest of the oil that is in the priest's hand he shall put on the head of him who is to be cleansed. Then the priest shall make atonement for him before Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Leviticus 14, 14 through 18. The commentary states, the blood placed on the 3 body parts to symbolize that henceforth the Metzorah must improve himself in mind, symbolized by the ear, in deed, symbolized by the thumb, representing action, and effort, symbolized by the big toe, representing forward movement. I can also see the application of the oil in these same 3 spots as an equal need for the Holy Spirit to help control our mind, our deeds, and our efforts. Beginning in verse 33, we cover the topic of a house that is infected with tzorah and the procedures for purifying it. The text tells us that when they are in the promised land is when this will happen, the land of Canaan. And it tells us that God himself will actually put the tzorah on the house. The section of the Torah dealing with tzorah that we've been reading ends with this. This is the law for any case of leprous disease, for an itch, for leprous disease in a garment or in a house, and for a swelling or an eruption or a spot, to show when it is unclean and when it is clean. This is the law for leprous disease. Leviticus 14, 54 through 57. It's thought that if a person is becoming involved in sin that will be leading to becoming a Metzorah, that God would first infect his home with tzorah. If he doesn't get the hint and change, God will in turn infect his garment, something a little closer to him personally. And if he still won't change, the tzorah will be placed on the person. Chapter 15 covers various bodily discharges that will put someone in an unclean state to differing degrees. Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, Speak to the people of Israel, and say to them, When any man has a discharge from his body, his discharge is unclean. And this is the law of his uncleanness for a discharge, whether his body runs with his discharge, or his body is blocked up by his discharge. It is uncleanness. Leviticus 15, 1 through 3. Verses 1 through 18 covered discharges from a male. The Hebrew word translated as discharge is zav, and is some kind of issue that's not normal, at least in most use cases of the word zav. As we've covered before, uncleanness is contagious and can be transmitted to other people or items. Also, most of the prescriptions for dealing with any of these items involves washing with water to some degree. Throughout history, the Jewish people have been blamed for many plagues and disease outbreaks in the world. This is because the Jews in those areas were either slightly affected or not affected by all these killer outbreaks. So they must be the problem. When the truth of the matter is that the Jews of that time were actually just following the commandments in the Torah. They were isolating or social distancing. They were limiting what they came in contact with. And they were washing routinely for all kinds of different contacts. All this while the rest of the world hadn't even figured out how a germ worked, and they actually avoided bathing to avoid becoming sick. It's time for your monthly bath. When a woman has a discharge, and the discharge in her body is blood, she shall be in her menstrual impurity for 7 days, and whoever touches her shall be unclean until the evening. Leviticus 15:19. Verses 19 through 30 cover discharges from women. As we discussed last week, the woman's normal monthly cycle is known as nidah, as it's discussed here in this portion. Remember that nidah doesn't refer to blood, but rather to her period of separation, primarily separation of intimacy with her husband. The section also covers discharges that are not normal and the procedure for covering each situation. And our portion ends with this summary. Thus you shall keep the people of Israel separate from their uncleanness, lest they die in their uncleanness by defiling my tabernacle that is in their midst. This is the law for him who has a discharge and for him who has an emission of semen, becoming unclean thereby. Also for her who is unwell with her menstrual impurity, that is, for anyone, male or female, who has a discharge, and for a man who lies with a woman who is unclean. Leviticus 15:31 through 33. As the text states, the primary importance of the laws of clean and unclean is the defiling of the tabernacle in our midst, because the consequence could be death. Since there is no standing tabernacle or temple today, the chances of literal death are a lot lower. But we are the temple of God and the temple of the Holy Spirit, collectively and individually. God, in rebuking rebellious Israel, said this in Ezekiel, "Her priests have done violence to my law and have profaned my holy things. They have made no distinction between the holy and the common, neither have they taught the difference between the unclean and the clean. And they have disregarded my Sabbaths, so that I am profaned among them." Ezekiel 22:26. God takes seriously some of the things that we haven't in the past, especially with the issues of clean and unclean. Let's do our part as best we can to live up to the awesome covenant that we have been graciously grafted into. Yeshua came and walked the Torah perfectly, not so we don't have to, but to show us that it can be done and to give us an example to follow. I pray this teaching has been edifying. Let's lift up the name of the Holy One. With love, in Echad, Shalom.